Sean todos bienvenidos. Everybody, welcome to this special live transmission. As you know, here in the Palomazos, or the jam sessions will be the most proper name in English, I believe. We like to talk with different kind of people that are developing projects or that are working either in film or more recently with different kind of authors. For that, we have been talking with some novelists, like in this case, Tom Merritt. We have been talking also with Elisa McCausland. And in this occasion, I am really glad to present you with a very special guest, a writer that I have been following from his, at least the first time that I got contact with his material was with comic books. And from that, I believe that I have been enjoying a lot of the stuff that he has been writing in books and also in comic books. And well, let me introduce you to Paul Cornell. How are you doing, Paul?
Hello. Oh, fine. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
No, I'm really thankful for your time. I really appreciate you taking this time to talk with us, especially since it's the weekend. It's a Saturday. Do you have some sort of backlash or celebration, like from the taken from the Black Friday or something in digital sales?
Not at all. This is the thing. The Americans have Thanksgiving here. We have nothing at all. And we have had Black Friday inflicted on us, despite the fact that it's meaningless here.
Yeah, that's correct. It's a different reference, a different culture. And I just ask that because, well, obviously in Mexico, because we are so close to them, we have those big sales on Amazon or on different kind of stores. So we are trying to copy that, to sell more. But well, that's a different topic. So.
Oh yes.
Paul, first of all, as I mentioned, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being with us. And I want to talk about your most recent work, and it's something that I have enjoyed. It had been published with the different editorials, and right now you are publishing it with IDW, and I believe it's the final part of your Saucer saga. Is that correct?
Well, yes, in one way. Saucer Country was the original series at Vertigo, and Saucer State is the sequel now at IDW. And we'll be running for 6 issues, and then we'll have a gap, and then we'll return to finish the story. So after this, there's about 6 issues worth of story left, but we're nearly there.
Oh, I see. And for example, Saucer Country, obviously it establishes the characters, the main character being Arcadia, who is running for the presidency. In this case, she began as a governor, if I'm not mistaken, and we are doing a follow-up of her trials, her tribulations, and especially about all the things that are surrounded, because there are some particularities in this. Obviously, the name gives you kind of a hint about what we are talking about. I love the description that actually they have at the IDW, because it's a mix between House of Cards and the X-Files.
Yes, absolutely. On the eve of her presidential run, the governor of New Mexico is abducted by aliens. And we're never precise about what that means. She doesn't know what that means, and neither do we quite. And the whole story is about her discovering what actually happened and why, and how that relates to her gaining the presidency in Saucer State and trying to use the office of the US president to discover what happened and whether it's a wider security issue.
And for example, the first question, and perhaps you have been asked this a lot of times, is why did you wanted to mix these topics? Obviously, you have some reference from the politics, but it's not a heavy on politics story, and you are mixing those elements. Where did your interest came from?
Well, it's 2 things I'm very interested in. I'm very interested in politics. I'm a what you might call a politics fanboy. I love the cut and thrust of political life. And also, I have a great interest in UFO mythology. From when I was a boy, I was very scared underneath the blankets late at night reading silly 1970s UFO books with a torch. And so it's UFO mythology is really interesting. It's this many-hued mythos that it's very American, and it's exported to other countries. and it's kind of like an American art form, like jazz, and it's been it may be actually on the wane now. We may be seeing the end of ufology. So it's had a good run. I mean, 70 years or so. But as a body of modern myth, it's extraordinary. It's it's not talked about very much because it's difficult to do fiction about mythology, especially mythology that's, evolving all around you as it happens. So I thought I'd come at it from the point of view of it as a body of mythology, not like the X-Files, where at least some of it may be true and the various truths of it are important every single week. We deal with it as something that may or may not be true, but that's really interesting whether or not it's true. If Mulder discovers something that isn't true in the X-Files, that's basically the end of the episode. If we discover something's not true, that's still very much of interest to our Professor Kidd, who's the character who's most bound up in UFO mythology. He's Arcadia's main advisor in this area secretly.
And we have some sort of the search for the truth in a way. And as we mentioned, there are some tribulations, obviously, trying to making sense of what actually happens, and that had been deal with the first part of the Saucer Country, and obviously with the latest part with the Saucer State saga. So another thing that I want to ask you, do you have any references that you took for the characters? Were based on something, or perhaps only using on general ideas that you had?
Well, I did some research into New Mexican politics. I'm fascinated with New Mexico. I chose New Mexico because of the UFO component, because it's not only a big state in terms of real life rocket science, if you like, but it's also a big state in terms of UFO mythology. Myself and my wife did a big tour around it when I knew I was going to write this book, visiting places with tremendously romantic associations from my childhood as the places where this weird stuff has touched the earth, Socorro and poor old Roswell, which kind of suffers under the burden of it. And Roswell would so like to be an entirely different town. And it's got this kind of strange mythological shadow which it tries to confine to one single street with a few inflatable aliens. But the politics was something. I talked to friends of mine who lived there. There are a lot of authors live in New Mexico, and I got to stay with them and talk about the political situation there. And Arcadia kind of came from my thoughts as to what a successful candidate who had a Mexican background. Her father was originally an illegal immigrant many decades before. What a successful candidate who had that background might be like, and how she would have to present herself. And this was before Trump came along and moved the window so dramatically, in that I thought it was basically a given that sometime in the near future there would be a US president of Hispanic descent. I think there probably still will be, but he's dropped a big stone in the water and messed things up, as in so many fields. But nevertheless, one thing I'm really proud of is that a number of our bets about how the future was going to go from the original series, we talk about Russian interference in American politics a lot. And it's slowly becoming clear to our audience, I hope, that that's one of our central threads. And we haven't released the cover to issue 6 yet, but it really says that very loudly. And so I'm very proud that we got there. And it's made, the progress towards the end of the series, thankfully we're actually tracking real world politics instead of having to say, oh my goodness, we're in a different universe, we have nothing to do with that. We really do. We're actually being able to comment on it. So sorry, I've gone on and on. Pardon me.
It's okay, don't worry.
I wish I had some Spanish, by the way. It would be much easier if I could, and I'm terribly sorry that I don't.
No, don't worry, and it's okay. And for example, now that you mentioned about the Russian intervention, obviously I don't want to spoil the end of the latest issue, which is issue 5, not the issue 4. But well, I actually added this cover because it's one that I really love, because some of the recurring images that you have use, at least in the covers of the comics, makes this kind of reference in here. And obviously at the end, I get when you were explaining the cover of what's happening, the final page of what is coming, the final page of issue 5 obviously has a reminiscence and about foreign powers, and in this case also in the title it mentions the Russians. So I am really interested and intrigued about what is going to happen next.
Mm-hmm. That's lovely. Thank you.
You already mentioned this, but I want to get a little bit deeper into the topic. Did the change in world relationships, in world politics, both in England and in the United States, change a lot or not even a little about the original story that you had planned?
It changed nothing at all, because, as I said, we kind of anticipated, which was delightful. We have introduced a kind of Trump figure, somebody who represents that feeling in America, who is looking to be her opponent in the next election. But actually, because at the end of issue 1 of Saucer State, a real, genuine, absolute nuts and bolts spacecraft is discovered heading towards the edge of the solar system, heading towards Earth in a year's time, broadcasting signals to Earth. And suddenly what was mythology has now become, absolute solid NASA-approved news item. And so politics has suddenly been thrown into a different light. And her opponent is making strange noises about, maybe it's not the next election that will be the tipping point. Maybe they can make some kind of move before that. And the Russian president has suddenly come out with some very aggressive language about the approaching aliens, which, Arcadia is trying to work out why on earth they should feel that way. And so we're flying to Russia. The end of issue 6 ends with us in Russia. And the start of the final arc will start there. And as I say, we were able to track it, I think, pretty well. So yeah, it's been a really strange trip watching the political landscape change across the life of this title. But as I say, I think we've managed to track it.
Yeah, and actually it feels, at least in my side of the world, I would actually rather have the kind of personality of some of the political figures, in this case of Arcadia, that you mentioned, instead of the current president of the US.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So would I. Arcadia has her problems, but she is a politician of conscience, and she's doing her best, which I'm not sure you can say about the current incumbent.
Well, perhaps he's doing his best, but a different thing. All right. And for example, one of the things that struck me the most at the beginning, obviously, I have been reading the story from the start. Perhaps I'm not quite fresh on the details of the first volume, to put it in one way. But one of the things that struck me the most is how you actually kind of mixed, obviously, the meaning of the word alien doesn't only refer to people from outer space. It means to somebody from a different part of the world. So in the case of the United States, and obviously you have already mentioned about the setting of the story, New Mexico, which has a peculiar mythology that came from the mid last century. up now. And obviously, it's one of the parts that it's more resilient, or perhaps where more conflicts are, at least in the perception that we have here in Mexico, with immigrants, with the illegal aliens that are going that way. And for example, it's kind of funny. Well, the United States is a particularity, as is Mexico, as is England, as it's any country in the world. But for example, I was just checking statistics, and the country that has most illegal immigrants in the United States is not Mexico, but Canada. It's usually people that travel there, and they never renew the visa that they had. And they just wanted to stay in there, but because the skin color and the language is pretty much the same, there is not this kind of difference. This thing doesn't happen, and particularly in the setting that you are placing the story, and it actually reflects with the political view, because when you have an outsider, in this case Arcadia, you have some conflict. So I love it how you mixed this. Can you talk us a little bit more about this, about the kind of political struggles? You already mentioned that you have a Trump look-alike or similar character in there.
Dumfries, yes. I think what this comes down to is that a sensible political policy right now in the US would be to say that a certain number of who are right now illegal immigrants from south of the border, it's a really good idea to have them there. That actually they're a welcome presence and a useful presence. Nobody right now is going to get up and say that, but that's the truth. And it's also true that far from being a flood, the arrow is now pointing back the other way. I am telling you things about which you're probably utterly aware. I'm terribly sorry. Like, you don't need an English person to come along and tell you that.
But we always love the outer perspective, believe me.
But that notion and that the distance of the practicality of that from what's happening in real life, very much. It's very much speaks to my thoughts as to what Arcadia's policies might be. You know, Arcadia basically is aiming to stand for sanity about this whole business, and that illegal immigrants are people, and they're people who've had children who are Americans, and a lot of them are Americans, and there's a definition of personhood going on here, but then for her to be faced with the absolute nuts and bolts arrival of a bunch of aliens who have actually, she thinks possibly, if it's them, done terrible things to her. What's she going to do? Is she going to put up a wall between Earth and them? I think this is interesting, and it's something that we play on all the way through. The radio talk show hosts in the comic play on her softness on immigration. It's something that not. Because the X-Files doesn't go there, it's not talked about a lot. But there's an awful kind of cross-section of the UFO conspiracy community and the alt-right. UFO conspiracy law is quite right-wing. And I thought that was really interesting in an area people hadn't gone into. So, I wanted to indicate that this body of mythology has a political bent to it as well from about the mid-'80s. It goes from being really quite liberal and hippie to really quite extreme and survivalist quite quickly. And Whitley Strieber's work about aliens that abducted him and anally raped him really kind of fed into and started to be incorporated into that really kind of extreme body of conspiracy law, but not all of them by any means. There are there are UFO conspiracy theorists of all different political hues, but there's a chunk there. And because the X-Files needed Mulder to be heroic, they very much didn't go there. So I thought, that's interesting. Let's go there. And there are various other areas where the two areas collide. When Hillary Clinton started talking about UFO disclosure, my little meter went off the scale. It was like, wow, we're actually venturing into the areas in my book. That's fabulous. Because of course, people who follow UFO mythology, I'm agnostic about it. I'm not a believer. I'm a Fortean. I keep my distance. I'm interested in it. I don't necessarily think any of it is true. Mm-hmm. But people who are into UFO mythology often think disclosure is their big word. There will be a moment of disclosure where all the secrets come out and the world is changed. It's kind of like the rapture. And I thoroughly suspect that there aren't any secrets, but that there's nothing in that box. But what I do think, however, is that the business of UFO mythology has been, in the real world, exploited by the intelligence services, the intelligence community of America, of the USA, tremendously. That Freedom of Information requests have revealed that the earliest UFO groups in the early 50s have lots and lots of intelligence officers in them. And they're not there to debunk or to observe. They're there to encourage. Because the US government, of course, would much prefer that when people look up and see something odd in the sky, they see an alien spacecraft rather than a U-2. They're starting to toy with all sorts of things they want to put up into the sky, particularly over New Mexico. And if you can put into people's minds the idea that what they're looking at is not of this earth, it really helps. And it really helps if people who see something unusual in the sky are laughed at. Also, I suspect that for decades during the Cold War, the Americans tried to hint to the very credulous Soviet Union, who, kept releasing news items about psi powers and things like that. Mm-hmm. They really thoroughly wanted to hint to them that they had a flying saucer and that they were back engineering it. In order to, I think Reagan's Star Wars stuff was the end product of that finally tipped the Soviet Union into thinking we can't compete with that. We cannot economically match that level of technology. And if so, it's a splendid intelligence long game, and actually a reasonably ethical one, in that it managed to bring down the Soviet Union without hurting anybody. But there are various interesting little whirlpools along the way. A lot of this is taken from the best book about UFOs, Mirage Men by Mark Pilkington, which talks to a lot of people involved in the intelligence community and points out the various very sensible ways in which UFO mythology could be used in intelligence operations, and possibly has been. So that's sort of one of the central theses of Saucer Country and Saucer State as well. We're really getting to the nub of it by the end of issue 5 and into issue 6 of Saucer State. And we'll do an issue in the finale which just does the whole history of the intelligence community and UFOs as far as I fictionally see it. And I suspect some of my guesses may be true.
And now that you mention it here, I remember one line of dialogue that it's actually in the issue 5, which is the one that actually came out this week in Saucer State, where one of the main characters just came out from an abduction. I just love the way that you treat this kind of fictional characters, mixing the modern mythology, as you mentioned, because you have fairies, you have obviously the aliens in there. And when he came out and some other people get to him, I believe that's a military person and somebody else, I love the line of dialogue because they mentioned that when you find somebody who comes out of this kind of state, as this character is, they always don't react as regular people do. They look more like comic book characters. And I am reading this in a comic book character. Of course, they are going to be like that, but it's actually true. Now that you mentioned the rest of the theories, the psy-ops from the Russians at World War II or something like that, it's like something that you could read in a science fiction novel before, and I believe that it's something like I want to believe that it's true. It's not like it's actually possible to be.
I think it's possible. I do think that may be this may be the sadist version of what's happening. Issue 5, which is just out, is my tribute to a writer. He's a historian of religion, actually, called Jeffrey Kripal, Kripal, and he treats UFO mythology as literally a modern religion. Mm-hmm. And he's also a historian of mainstream religions as well. But he's got a very interesting attitude to the paranormal, that just because it's impossible doesn't mean it didn't happen. And as somebody he writes not disbelieving histories of major religions, so he writes about miracles quite straightforwardly. And it occurred to him that he should also write about the not allowed areas of numinous experience in the same way. So hence he writes a lot about flying saucers. And the issue is full of quotes from him. And, that one you mentioned at the end, he's also very interested in comic books. He's done an entire book about comic books, about superhero comics. But anyway, so I've just seen his website, his Twitter feed come up on your feed there. And I really should point out how gorgeous Ryan Kelly's work is and how much a part of this he is. I mean, I couldn't imagine what this book would be like without Ryan's artwork, which I think is so important. And the way he can do both very, very rooted real life stuff and gorgeous acting between characters, but also can do the intrusion of the impossible into these normal situations. He's amazing, and he's a major part of the success of this book.
Yeah, and actually that's part of the chemistry that you both have. I believe that it reflects a lot on the storytelling, and it actually helps to develop the story in a better way. And for example, I was looking in some of the pages from previous issues, and one thing that came from to mind, and actually this came from one of the questions that we got from people. Let me just check in here where I got it. And it's mainly about, since you have been working in different kind of media and TV and in comic books and obviously in your novels, how do you feel about what of these medias do you believe it's better for you to develop your personal voice? And I mention this because, for example, in one of the previous issues, you use the 9-panel layout, which is classic. Alan Moore obviously uses it a lot. Currently, Tom King is using it a lot in his comics. How do you feel that the comic book language adapts to your personal voice, or which medium do you prefer the most?
Well, I think I prefer prose, but honestly, they've all got. Each of them is a holiday from the other for me. Each of them is a vacation, and I enjoy working tremendously at all three. The 9-panel grid is simply because I knew I had a long speech with lots of different emotional states to get through, and I thought it would be a nice display of what Ryan can do to just leave it to him to give us those expressions. I'm a great believer in number of panels, shape of panels can really affect a comic book reading experience. And my thought for that was, how Brian Michael Bendis will sometimes do a page of the same image head saying things. I think that has an impact that is extremely postmodern and is kind of. It's the child of Howard Chaykin, but I really wouldn't do that while I've got Ryan Kelly at hand, who can give those faces such good acting and take us on an emotional journey across those 9 panels. So that's my version of that. The 9-panel Watchmen grid has a sort of steady beat to it. And, Dave Gibbons is one of the utter geniuses, obviously. Mm-hmm. But, I think that feels like the steady beat of a press conference. Mm-hmm. So yes, that's part of the craft of comics, and I'm really pleased that people notice. I tend to save up splash pages very rarely for Source Estate because I really want them to be big images, deserving of the splash page. So usually that's where our monsters and creatures and twist endings appear. And our lovely mythological populace like Orthon from Venus and the Silver Space Lady. Oh, one thing I really want to say, and that's really important to me actually, is that it always seemed to me like the X-Files didn't really worry too much about where it was going. It didn't have in its head an end game. And we have a complete end game. We're going to answer every single question. We're going to solve every single mystery. We're going to tie every single knot. And, I already know exactly what the plot for the ending is. And I know what the last picture is. So, hopefully by the end, it'll be a really thorough, complete experience that resolves all its own questions. And that's really important to me, especially when one is dealing with mythology. I think it's up to me to actually shape it to be a satisfying, conclusive experience,
Mm-hmm. And one final thing that I want to say, and I really love, for example, as you mentioned, the kind of expressivity and obviously the way that you use the words to tell a story here. But actually, a press conference is one of the most common things or the easiest reference to recall. In the case of the United States, because, that you have obviously the flag, the shield and something. But for example, in this case, now that you were talking about mythology and different kinds of beliefs, it also struck me like, you have this, the main character in here having a public conference in there. And
but I should say though, she's not really having a publicity conference there. That's her imagining it.
That's correct.
That's the publicity conference she couldn't possibly have.
Exactly. That's just the scenario that she's picturing. And for example, I love the way that, for example, the shield of the United States also resembles in this space like one of the saint pictures that you have for the Catholic Church, for example.
Oh yes, and do I hadn't thought of that, and I think that's Ryan. I think that's Ryan doing it because we do represent her a bit like that at the end of issue 1. At the end of issue 1, I said that consciously about her holding the alien baby in abduction land, in that mental space of an abduction. That we should set her up as a kind of Mary figure. So maybe Ryan kept running with that. That's really interesting.
There you have perhaps something to ask him or to reference. We're pretty much getting to the final part of the talk, but I don't want to leave this before asking you about something that I have enjoying. I remember that, as I mentioned, perhaps the first thing that I read that you wrote, that it was something in Superman, I believe, with the Lex Luthor saga, which, by the way, I really love because that was a period when Lex Luthor was way more interesting than Superman as a character, and that was mainly because of your writing. So
thank you. I really enjoyed that run. I had a great time on that.
Mm-hmm. And I remember that after that, we had Demon Knights, we have something from Wildstorm, and then you mentioned that you wanted to write. You wanted to focus more on, obviously, on your characters, which you are doing in Saucer State, but more in on your novels. And when you announced that you were going to release London Falling, I was like, okay, let's see what's this about. And I remember that it wasn't even available in Mexico, in the United States. So I was like, I don't care how much it costs, but I want to have actually my first printing from England. And I really enjoyed this. So I want to share, obviously, a part of the love that I have for this story. Currently, there are 3 novels that are the ones that can be buy. Can you tell us a little bit about the characters, or actually better, about the story that you're developing in these novels, in the Shadow Police saga?
Sure. It's about a small team of modern-day British detectives in London who accidentally gain the ability to see the hidden magic and monsters, and decide that they have to keep their sanity. They have to use police methods and tactics against them. So it's that it's very like Source Estate, actually, in that it's a bunch of professionals from another field encountering the impossible and using their own professional tactics. So we're 3 novels in, and that's all there's going to be for the moment, because the publisher dropped the series. So I'm at the moment concentrating on writing other stuff and trying to get ahead a bit, and hopefully we'll return to the series later on, because I still feel there are 2 more books in that series to write. I'm really proud of it. My other fiction series at the moment is the Witches of Lichford books, which are ongoing and a great pleasure to write. Urban fantasy in the countryside, basically. So yeah, I'm trying very hard to only write my own characters at the moment, because I think I just owe it to myself to have a stretch of that where I try and get some stuff of my own down.
And obviously you have more control. You can develop the characters in any way you want. But there you have, guys. If you want to read something, I personally love the Shadow Police saga, obviously because you have this kind of mixture, and obviously the tagline says all. It's as you put it in there, only they can see the evil. So you have the references and the differences between reality and what is actually happening in, for the characters who can see this. And we have the Witches of Lichford, which it's you have published how many of these series?
3 so far.
3 too.
And I've also got a one-off horror novel out this year called Chalk, which is very autobiographical and about growing up in the 1980s and the magical power of pop music and hideous bullying.
Oh, I see. That's I have to pick that one, because to be quite honest, I didn't check it. But that's perhaps I haven't been following the proper places. This is where I recommend people that if they want to check a little bit more about the materials that you are publishing, or if they want to get in touch with you, you have a fan page and in Facebook. They have to. I will tell people this: be careful, because you can find different results for Paul Cornell. So go to facebook.com.
Oh, yeah. As we were doing the preparation here, you found an ancient version of my page, which I thought I got rid of. But there we are. I've got to go get rid of that now.
Exactly. So just get to Paul Cornell Official. That's how you will get the official page of Paul Cornell, where obviously there is a mention of the Sorcerer's State number 5 and the. What we were talking about, the future of the Shadow Police, and more news about this. Also in Twitter, you appear as Paul lower. I forget how in English you say that.
I don't know quite what that is.
Underscore.
Paul, line on the floor, Cornell.
There you are. Line on the floor sounds more poetic than underscore. Paul, line in the floor, Cornell with double L at the end. You remember that? That's actually where you can get more interaction with him. And if you want to get to know about the different works that he has been doing in comic books, pretty much in every media, you can go just to paulcornell.com, where you can find pretty much everything about you. Paul, please tell me that this one is actually updated, so we don't get any kind of other pages as we did.
That's absolutely, that's the one. That's the place.
All right, so we got it in that. Something else that you want to mention for the end of this transmission, Paul?
No, I think that's just about it. And thank you very much for having me along. I very much enjoy this. There are actually Spanish language editions of the original Saucer Country, the prologue volume, printed in Spain. I very much hope those get over to Mexican comic stores.
Yeah, actually, I don't remember if it's Panini or who is publishing right now. It's in Spain. But to be quite honest, it's actually easier to get the English versions in here in Mexico, obviously, because they come closer.
Right.
But I will mention this. People who only read in Spanish, as in Spain or most of Latin America, you have an option in there. Pueden leer Saucer Country en español. So that's I use the reference in there. And Paul, thank you very much for your time. I really had a blast with this conversation, and you are one of the writers that I really love the style that are currently working. So it was a blast to have this chance to talk with you.
Very, very kind of you. Thank you so much.
All right, and for the rest of you, remember that the downloadable version of this show will be available, I believe that early tomorrow. You will have the downloadable audio. We have some problems with the Facebook streaming, but I will fix that as soon as we end the recording. I will post this also on Facebook. In YouTube, we had no problem. On Periscope, we had no problem. And we will see everybody the next time. Thank you very much.